All right, I see people coming in. Hi, folks. We will get started here shortly. Welcome. Give people a couple of minutes to join us. That annoying blue light isn't flashing in my face. Okay, well, I don't want to delay too terribly long. Um, Welcome to this is just for some context. My name is Spencer Story Johnson. This is my first time hosting an event for the Writers Room Boston. I'm really excited to be hosting the Readings from the Room series. This is an ongoing series. Every month we invite writers to come read a variety of work from poetry and fiction to plays and anything else that we can find people to read for us. Um, it's a part of the Writers Room. As I said, the Writers Room is a uh, community space for writers at any stage of their career to join as members and participate in a writing community that helps support each other. And there's all sorts of writing groups and events available for people to participate in, such as Readings from the Room. There are also a number of other events coming up through Writers Room. There will be on October 22nd will be our next Readings from the Room reading series. That will be at 7 p.m. on the 22nd. There will be a table for a writer's room at the Boston Book Festival. That's going to be from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. on October 26th. BostonBookFest.com, I believe, is the website to find out more about Boston Book Fest. And then there will be an interview as part of the After Hours interview series on October 29th at 7:30. It's 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Information can be found at writersroomofboston.org. I will post that in the chat so people can see that. You can also stay tuned there and on social media and other places to find out more about upcoming events that will be announced in the coming weeks. I think that covers all of my housekeeping here. Welcome, everybody. Uh, I will now introduce our reader for this evening. Angela Siew is a multilingual poet with a BA from Brown University and an MFA from Emerson College. That is where I am fortunate enough to know Angela from. She was recently a Peter Taylor Fellow for the 2023 Kenyon Review Writers Workshop and an administrative staff scholar for the 2023 and 2024 Bread Loaf Writers Conference. She has received support from the City of Boston and the Community of Writers Poetry Workshop. Her work has been published in Salamander, Crab Orchard Review, and Art New England, among other places. And she has a chapbook, Coming Home, which is currently available from Cutbank, which is from the University of Montana. She's a former private tutor and English language teacher, and she also has taught overseas in Chile and in Italy. She currently teaches online poetry workshops for Grub Street and the International Women's Writing Guild. You can learn more at her website, angelasiew.com. I can put that in the chat as well. And without further ado, Angela, why don't you take it away?
Great. Thank you so much, Spencer. Thanks, Spencer, Leslie, Mark, and the Writers' Room for inviting me. I'm really excited to read tonight. I've always really admired the Writers' Room of Boston for being such a great community and resource for Boston writers, which I still kind of consider home in my heart. Um, Thank you all for coming also. I am going to read about 10 poems tonight. Most of them will be from my new chapbook, Coming Home, and I'm going to show off the cover, which I'm proud of, but it's maybe a little blocked because of the virtual background. So the first poem I'm going to read is the opening poem from the book, and this will kind of start off a series of family poems that I'm going to read. So this poem is called Longevity Noodles, and it has an epigraph. Symbolizing a long life, this is a popular Chinese dish on birthdays and other celebratory occasions. The length and unsevered preparation are also symbolic of the eater's life. My mother and I order the same soup the afternoon before I leave again. She searches for advice to give her grown daughter as we sit face to face, trying to eliminate our distance across the table. I look into my bowl, imagine the noodles before they were submerged, bundled into spools. I see my mother's hair as a girl, unwound, long and silky, and wonder what made her happy, what she dreamed of, if she would have chosen a different life. If the life I'm living is the one she wanted, and I fail for me, do I fail for her too? I note the crosshatch lines on my knuckles that count the times my fingers have bent, grabbed, pulled, done the tasks of daily living. Suds have sunken rough patches on her hands, what used to be jade-like skin, before the baths she prepared for us. When did the veins in her hands grow so deep? Our hands bring the bowl to our mouths, our lips parched to drink. The gift. My nephew doesn't know the strokes of his Chinese name. He doesn't know the beginning characters like person, the first part falling from left to right, forming the torso and leg, the second finishing the body. He doesn't imagine the tiny marks on either sides as hands holding flames to make fire, the hooks on moon as points of a slender crescent. It is not his mother tongue, only the tongue of his grandparents. To him, a box doesn't create the contours of country, 8 lucky strokes, and a mouth neatly packed inside. It is not my first tongue either. I forget sometimes that mouth is in our surname, that my brother and I share a mountain peak. I am woman and he is man. Together we make the word for good. My father is a poet in his first language. I give my nephew the Boggle Jr. from my childhood, the cards with simple illustrations, words spelled out 3 or 4 letters across. Box. B-O-X. When my father asks him what a box is, he explains, it's something you use to carry something else inside it. My father's guitar. He practices in front of a mirror behind the stand he brought from Hong Kong 40 years ago. Rust circling the joints, the arms delicately fanned open, one tilting to the side. He holds a theory book with songs named for speed, minuet, andante, allegretto. But he doesn't look, plays only scales, steadily up and down, returning to missed notes. He must learn what he has forgotten, hunched over a computer for years, pounding on keys, the hard noise absorbing into the flat board. But my father no longer hears the strings that need replacing, the shrill tweak of the high notes, the low, loose string splaying out. He must see the deep wrinkles of his hands and wrists as they bend and flex, forming, shifting, crawling up the guitar neck, feel the rhythm of vibrations against the bridge and his ears' damaged chords, against his heart's irregular pulse. My father plays his guitar every night. He doesn't sing or strum with a marbled pick. It seems so long ago, the afternoons when I knelt by the case, clicked open the silver clasps, and pretended to turn the knobs on the pointed head, trace down the length of each string, plucking them above the whole of the body. The next poem is my dad hasn't been well for a bit, and this is kind of like my epic poem about that. So this is called An Aria in Two Parts. 1. My mother presses the button to leave the cardiac ICU, the heavy wooden doors opening like a slow gate. I follow her to a wooden bench, the front of a house made of things we can't see, controlled by God or gods, the body's internal temperament. She begins to cry, says how my dad told her, "Nga mo yong," I'm no good anymore. Now she is having trouble breathing, the tissue crumpled in her hand forgotten, curls around her face as limp as her wrists. She composes herself enough to look at her phone, gripping the thin plastic tightly. I need to call your aunt and tell her to go to temple. A hiccup, a heave, and her shoulders begin to shake. Dad is going to be fine. His body is not going to give out. For the first time, she is the scared child, the enormity of an idea, an absence, becoming rock and universe, filling the blood to the left side of her heart, enlarging it to carry my father's heart and hers. 2. When I enter the room, all I can see of my father is his head, suddenly small against the pillows. The room is filled with his bed, his wires and monitors, the air of the sick. His eyes are closed, his body wrapped tightly in the striped hospital blankets. I am floating, ghostly, young. I am a little girl again, standing at his bedside, waiting for him to look at me. Because there is nothing to do but wait, I sit down, stare at the flowers on the back of a chair, how they have faded more quickly than the leaves. My father turns his head from side to side, trying to sleep, a hinge, moaning without a sound. I ask the nurse if she can give him something. She looks as if she understands what even I have not understood, nods, leaves to retrieve a pain pump. Her worn sneakers squeak on the tile, its shine competing with the patterned glass outside my father's room. So for the next couple poems, I was kind of torn between two different sets of poems, but I think I'm gonna read like three love poems or relationship poems, and they kind of like interweave with the family poems in the chapbook. Caro M. After Lee Young Lee. 1. I've never written a sonnet for you, for anyone, because I'm a poet who can't write sonnets, and I'm a woman who doesn't know how to love a man who loves her. I wish I believed in magic, the moon so large in the sky it follows us. 2. In the town in which I love you, we visit your sister's house, sit on the terrace, look out the arches as she stretches out on the divano. We wait for la luna rosa, the dusty moon. When it doesn't come, your sister and I walk to the backyard, the white dog ahead, sniffing the darkness. She climbs a short ladder to see beyond the terracotta roofs. I've never been here before, here where her lithe body unfolds, shadow against blacker sky. 3. The city in which I love you is being constantly built. I am kind, and you are forgiving in this city of waterways. We arrive by train to a collection of islands surrounded by a lagoon. The light, murky blue touches a darker one, my head on your shoulder. You remark how marvelous this is, a place we are always arriving to, the sum of all the places we visited for the first time. So the next poem is called On Finding Zlatni Rat, and it's actually a beach in Croatia that I visited. I believe most of the beaches are this island I was on are kind of pebbly, and this is the only sand beach, and it kind of had like a thin strip that jutted out into the water, which was really memorable. On Finding Zlatni Rat. Sometimes I imagine you entering me, the faint smell of vinegar and lavender, and after I'm swimming up and away. I am enjoying the ability to decide one day to love you, the next to send you away. I thought I was different from the squid fleeing, the sea anemone cutting through the night. But spread on my fingertips is the meat of a taro root, pounded smooth, its veiny pulp slippery beneath my touch on the curve of your shoulder, slippery along the spine of my mouth where my changing words remain. Even if we were to ride together on channels of silk, in clear waters under a sun of elderberry flowers, you would find me again, only among the shards, the rusted and unbroken light. Poem with too many endings. Some days I come home. You cut the day's old bread, tasteless without salt, the long serrated knife on the table next to the fiori I've requested, their stems exposed, the ends submerged in just a bit of water. You arrive after work in the evenings, chimes and a bird landing on the small berry tree, me standing in pearls, tight dress, apron, steam and cutting board. You take me from behind. When I told you I hate you sometimes, it felt so good. Sometimes I feel like I can't hurt you, not in ways you would reveal. We walk now before dinner, past the olive tree with no leaves, under the bursting lemons, the hills tiered behind us, the church spires I cannot name. Before I came to stay, I thought of you at our dinner table alone, the line of your profile, your head as it dipped like a bird over a pool of water. Some song, timpani rolling to no rain, and something is coming. Your mouth and mine full of lush words. So I'm going to read the last poem in the chapbook, and then I'm going to read through three kind of newer poems. On disbelief and the wishes not included in prayers. On a bleak day, the sun shining on the bamboo palm and her statue of seated Buddha, my therapist leaned in and said, "Let me tell you something, and it's very simple. If you want something, all you have to do is ask." After a moment that felt like a rearranging of stars, I sucked in my breath, turned the thought over, ran through the seconds of the past month, past season, past year, and listened to the rushing water pouring into Buddha's stone pond, how it pushed forward, particle after particle, stream to stream. I couldn't possibly explain how that water moved. On a night when a halo encircled the moon, and the morning after, when a halo wrapped around the sun, I asked myself, what determines the separation of days? Ice crystals, the nightly newscaster said, a pleased smile on her face. They create the appearance of a ring called a 22-degree halo. That day held 60-degree temperatures 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, 2 weeks before the arrival of a lover from abroad, bringing the memory of a couple's picture on Ponte Vecchio under the half-light and hanging heat. It brought questions about courtship rituals and moon worship during the Mid-Autumn Festival, and if my mom knew she loved my father enough to see the richness of their life 30 years later in another country, too large, too brash, too free. Why tonight, of all nights, did I notice the colors of two trees with touching branches, the thick and thin lines, a rendering of the delicate lines of ships under moonlight? Take a quick water break here. And then I'm gonna finish with three poems that are newer. Um, Two of them I actually wrote last summer at Kenyon. Shout out to one of my workshop mates who's in the audience. And this is I want to be my mother when I turn 75. Praise the watermelon, its rosy blush, the surprising paleness of the inner rind, the crack when it splits open, just so much water, its ability to cool me from the inside, juice dribble or seed escaping the corner of my sugar-laden mouth. Praise my mother for remembering to buy one for us, for choosing the best, her third stop after Adong and Save-A-Lout. There is not enough food ever. For knocking on and hefting the giant benevolent beast from stand to cart to trunk to home. For saying, no, this is for us, when I ask if we are bringing it to my uncle's July 4th barbecue. For hacking and slicing, carving into its porous flesh because she knows I'm too lazy, my father too slow to cut it open. For her deep sigh and creaky knees as she bends to hoist the melon rolling on the hardwood floor of our entranceway as if harvesting from a field of so many watermelons. Praise my mother, who I find in a wicker chair in front of the TV, legs propped up and bed for a table, old stained sheet as a tablecloth, eating out of a giant Tupperware, fork midair by her mouth, full of mushed fruit, asking me, no telling me, is it okay? I'm going to finish it all. Two more poems. The title of this is actually inspired from an exhibit called Four Talks by Laurie Anderson. It's actually still on exhibit at the Hirshhorn in Washington, D.C. It's actually a really cool exhibit. Four Talks. I encourage you to look it up online. It's not the bullet that kills you, it's the hole. Suppose it's 1976. You are your mother's best friend. You know what her future will be like, what she will feel at 75, that sometimes her greatest excitement in the day will be to tell her doctor's son when he calls that she now no longer has to serve jury duty. No pressure to fulfill a civic duty for a country she didn't want to come to at first, a country that has accepted her kind of, despite her accent, her foreignness, and now her age. Tell her that in 45 years, she will tell her husband, who never really recovered from open heart surgery, that they made the right decision, that their children will be happy, will be free, that they too will be happy. Tell her while she's standing in the convenience store in Kowloon, near their one-bedroom apartment, while your older brother is kicking, that she should pick the more expensive barber scissors with the comfortable grip, that her children will visit often and won't leave her, that her husband will still cut his daughter's hair with his dim eyes in the living room while she talks about how those scissors are older than you are, while she explains she'd heard haircuts were expensive in the US, that she'll yell at your father not to worry about the mess, to step aside as she sweeps up the black clippings. Thanks for listening. So this last poem I'm going to read it was the title poem of my MFA thesis, and I'm still thinking is going to be the title poem for the full-length collection that I'm working on. And it is in three sections. Um, and two of the sections are kind of inspired, precipitated by a birthday. So I thought it was really cool um, that this is also the night before my birthday. It's a neat coincidence. Um, Premonitions of a Girl at the Witching Hour. One, if you break a mirror, bury the shards beneath a tree under a full moon, or burn and grind them into a fine powder. Float the fragments down a southerly flowing stream. The Romans believed a broken mirror held a trapped soul. Two, the night before my 21st birthday, the cabinet door fell off its hinges, a dead drop, shattering in my parents' bathroom sink. I peered down at their angles, at a face half slathered with cold cream, scented with powder. In that bathroom, I smoked often, with ceremony, incense, and music, in front of a mirror that filled the wall like a tapestry. After the first hits, I welcomed the strangeness of my reflection, clenching to hold a body together which threatened to stall and stop, find itself on its side in bed, staring at March on the wall. She opened her mouth and said hi, unhinged to let in the start of days, before the sinking of afternoons, the days light and moments easy. The girl I saw was hollow, a collapsed star. On the eve of my 30th birthday, I waited at the witching hour for spirits to arrive, and they did. They sat on my bed, laid down casually on the carpet. Some betrayed me, whispered lies about my family. Some were gracious, bringing secret thoughts. I looked for my grandfather, the one in the photo with the open mouth laugh, lifting me in the air before the stomach cancer. I imagined what he would say to me. Listen to your parents, to which I would respond, but I know better. By then, the spirits had left, already bored. My grandfather sat with me while I told him a vision of witches burying a mirror deep under grandfather roots against an egg-shaped moon. Before I was born, before my brother learned to covet, before it became my mother's heart and my father's worry, and how those pieces, because they couldn't be burned, were floated in a basket down a southerly flowing stream. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. And it looks like we've got some questions coming into the question and answer box right now, so uh, we can jump right into those. Before I get to the first question that's in the box, I just want to ask really quickly if you have a favorite poet that has inspired you in some way, or that you admire and try to emulate or have followed for a long time, or anything.
I feel like I always give the same answer. um, yeah, I was in a workshop this summer where the instructor asked like who are poet crushes, and I said mine was so boring because mine was like a long standing crush. And I said Lee Young Lee, who I think a lot of people enjoy also. So he was like, oh, heartthrob. Um, but Lee Young Lee, I feel like definitely when I like discovered his work, I was just really so taken aback. And I'd say the last poem that I wrote that I'm really excited about uses maybe like three moves from his poems, which yeah, I think is a gift. Yeah.
I love being able to pull from writers that we admire. I think that's a huge part of the process, and that leads nicely into Evelyn's question for you from the Q&A, which is, can you describe your writing process, how long it takes you to finish a piece? And I will add to that, does it vary much depending on the project that you are working
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I mean, it's funny like how your process changes through different periods of your life and like your writing life. Like in the MFA was like, oh, this is my job because I'm an MFA student and I workshop and I need to bring in a poem every 2 weeks. So I feel like I journaled a lot. Um, and I would write these like really long prose things. And then I would kind of find a poem in there and I would bring it to a workshop and like the workshop would help me shape it. and get the comments back and then, oh, this resonates with me, or oh, that's a great suggestion, but I don't know how to do that. Um, so that's kind of like the poems in the chapbook were kind of like that, like a lot of heavy guidance and influence and feedback from my instructors and like my cohort or other classmates. Um, Now I kind of keep up a writing process by I'm one of these summer writing conference people where I really kind of go hard and try to go to, sometimes I go to three in one summer because I love being able to meet like other writers from around the country and sometimes around the world. And that pressure also, and just it's very inspiring too to be around other faculty you haven't met before and studying with different poets. But that kind of pressure um, creates like a different kind of poem. And I've found I'm more like open to even writing in the notes app, which I would not really do before. um, I would say um, I'm not good at revising. So of course I love the poems that come out and are like almost done. Um, but there are these quotes by really well-established poets and, hearing advice from other writers about how you learn more about the poems that have to go through multiple rounds of revision. You learn more about, craft and your voice. That's what kind of like helps the poems that do kind of just come out. That was a really long answer. I
No,
think
that's a
I
great
answered.
answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean the writing process is always so fascinating. It's interesting to hear you talk about how it changes from it being an MFA sort of structured process to the more finding your own way kind of process after that. If other people have questions, feel free to put them either in the chat or in the Q&A section. We probably have time for one or two more. In the meantime, I've got a couple of questions from listening to your marvelous reading. Uh, I think one of the first things that stood out to me about um, that the first few poems you read, the ones that were all connected by family, was how much that the body played a role in those poems as well. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you see family and body being tied to one another, perhaps, or if there is something that draws you to talking about the body when you are talking about family.
That's a really great question. I was noticing that too when I was reading. I was like, oh, I specifically use the word body multiple times in this. Um, I don't know. I think I might have also been influenced because I kept hearing lots of poems that talk about the body. So then that started like at that time, that's kind of started appearing in my poems. Um, but your question tonight made me think of, I read the poem about my father being in the hospital. And I feel like a lot of my family poems are about aging and my parents aging. And I feel like maybe more poems are going to eventually be about me aging too. So like thinking about the body like as a symbol for that, about how like kind of feel with my parents. They once made this is a little bit of a tangent, but they once made this comment that uh, we went to like a play in New York and my parents had to walk like several blocks and like it was like windy and everything to get there. And afterwards they were like, oh, well, your brother, he doesn't really recognize that we're getting older. And they said it in Cantonese, which I thought was really cool, was they're like, in his heart, he thinks that we're still young. And I still feel very much the same way, even though like I kind of see that, my parents are getting older. And so I wonder if at that time and going forward, a kind of like a fascination of with the body as like this kind of vehicle while, the spirit and the soul are still not really aging or maybe aging a little bit, getting wiser. But
Yeah. That's fascinating because I think that that kind of connects to one of the other things I noticed about your poems was the way that you talk about time as well. And the way that you manipulate time and compress it. And like you talk about, I think it was in um, on disbelief where you talked about the seconds of the seasons and the years and how you kind of compress time and allow us to move through a lot of it at once, but then you also slow us down and let us look into those moments. Um, in more depth. And I wonder if that is sort of tied to that idea of the body as kind of a vessel for time. You can, if you have any thoughts on that, feel free to jump on. But the other thing that I wanted to ask you a little bit about, and I think this is something that's always hard to approach when reading poetry versus getting to see it on the page, is form. You do a lot of segmented poems, and I wondered if you could talk about how you came to that as a sort of reliable form for you, or if that is something that sort of manifests in each individual poem as you are working on it.
Oh, those are great questions. Yeah, that poem, The On Disbelief, was like a poem that I wrote, I think, towards the end of the first semester workshop at Emerson. And I thought it was like a mess. And I found like as a very orderly person, like I'll write these poems that will try to kind of, not be like linear. And sometimes I'll be like, does this make sense? Um, and so I appreciate what you said about like the beginning kind of starts with the therapist saying something and then the speaker really weighing it in their mind and focusing on that moment in time. And then there's all these like time leaps too. I think also across countries.
Mhm.
Uh yeah. And I feel like that kind of might have been like a standalone. um like even though I hope to have other poems like that more in the future. And to your question about the segmented poems, the sections, I think, kind of came out of the way that I was writing in the MFA program with the kind of journaling and then finding like small poems, in this sort of like grand thing of prose with like poetic tendencies in it. And so I feel like the sections were a way of having these kind of like vignettes and then connecting them. And it's interesting that you asked that because I don't think I really write sectioned poems anymore. I found some way to either kind of stay in the moment or maybe like that on disbelief poem have this kind of like large thing that's not linear that still kind of like remains as one.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I think that's all we have time for tonight. But thank you for answering those questions. Thank you for reading. Angela, you've been fantastic. This is this is exactly what I was excited about for doing this reading series and being a part of this, was getting to talk to wonderfully talented writers about the work they do and how they do it. Um, so thank you everybody for being here. And I just have one final announcement about the writers' room. We have a writing workshop sponsored by the room tomorrow happening at noon. The invitation is on Eventbrite, so if you go to Eventbrite and search Writers' Room of Boston, you should be able to find the information to register. Otherwise, if you have other questions or interest in the writers' room, definitely check out writersroomofboston.org. And of course, check out all of Angela's work everywhere you can find it. Um, Thank you once again, everybody, for being here. This was wonderful. Thank you, Angela.
Thank you, Spencer.
Good night,
Thanks so
everybody.
much. Thanks. Good night, everyone.